Hello Internet, and in this video we are going to be painting Tyranids for Hive Fleet Kraken. Over the last few years I've painted a lot of Tyranids in a lot of different ways, to a lot of different levels. Despite having painted all these different schemes, I've never liked one enough to use across my whole army. That is until the Parasite of Mortrex. I took this guy with me to a weekend in Nottingham and painted him in the Warhammer World painting area. As you can see, the finish on this model isn't the best. The wings are awful and I often have to stop myself from touching them up. Why? Why not make it better now that I am not working with the lighting of a retail shop? Well, the crappy finish is tied to my only visit to Warhammer World. The model holds memories, so I wanted to stay that way. As you can see, the terrifying winged monstrosity is painted to look like Hive Fleet Kraken, as that is the Hive Fleet that this creature was first seen with, according to the lore. Of all the painting schemes I have painted, this has been my favourite, and I think I am finally ready to start painting more Tyranids to join Hive Fleet Kraken. Given the range of beautiful new Tyranid models in the Leviathan box set, I couldn't choose which ones to start with, so I let my wife choose. Not knowing the names of anything, she rather confidently suggested I paint the small herd of Stegosaurus with shoulder cannons. When starting to paint my Barbgaunts, I already knew that I don't want them to be display level, just good enough to put on the table for a game. With that in mind, I'm going to try and use quicker techniques such as dry brushing and washes throughout the process. If you've watched my videos for some time, you might know that I often like to base coat models in colours that will contrast against the final colours. In that spirit, I base coat all areas of these bugs with Caliban green, which will provide dark green shadows across the whole model. You can obviously do this with a brush. I only use an airbrush here for speed, and it's the only part of this paint job that I actually use the airbrush for. As I like to get large areas out of the way first, I start by dry brushing all the skin areas with Cadian flesh tone, allowing that green to sit in all the recesses. I then follow up with another dry brush layer of bone colour, focusing on the raised areas that are more exposed to light. As you can see, we have achieved quite a high impact in a short period of time, using the dry brush here on a large area. Once the dry brushing is done, I add a little Caliban green to any of the carapace that was affected by the previous step. With a mix of Caliban green and Mephiston red, I start to apply a layer of paint to the carapace areas, leaving the pure green in the dips, chips and bumps. I'm quite messy with this step, as I know I'll be putting a fair bit of paint on top of this to mask it, but building the foundation can really help the final look of the piece. It was at this point that I felt the skin was a bit too desaturated. So to bring some colour back into the areas, I applied a sepia wash over all the skin, which would yellow it a bit instead of it appearing so pale. Getting back to the carapace, I used a 50-50 mix of Mephiston red and Trollslayer orange to apply a layer to each panel. I applied these layers near the edge of the panel where it would drop onto the next one. I used short, sharp movements to start to suggest lines that you can often see painted on Tyranid carapaces. I personally think they often look too clean and uniform for an organic creature like this, so I'm really messing with it. Irregularity and randomness is often the key to successfully mimicking nature. If you want a quicker way of applying this layer, you can dry brush on the colour. Just make sure to focus on the edges of the panels, leaving it darkest where it starts to lay under the panel above it. I applied this layer with a dry brush on 3 of the models and you can hardly notice a difference. Next up, using Trollslayer orange by itself, I apply edge highlights and slash marks to the edges of each piece of the carapace. This is the most time consuming part of the paint job, as it requires the most patience and precision. However, once it's done, you can get a nice bright edge to each armour panel and can start to see what these models will look like in the end. Tyranid models often have organic weapons that are coloured differently from the rest of the skin. In the case of Hive Fleet Kraken, they are a dark purple, but I'm going to go a bit brighter than normal. To base coat all the flesh areas of the shoulder cannons, I use purple by Vallejo, but you could use Xeros purple as an alternative if you were using Citadel colours. I also apply this base coat to the tubes that link the head to what appears to be a brain on its back. I mean, why can't they just keep it inside their skull like any other person? To bring all the fleshy details into focus, I wash these areas with Carabor Crimson. Once dry, I picked out the most exposed parts and highlighted them with a layer of Genestealer Purple, followed by a mix of Genestealer Purple and Ice Yellow, in very select areas, often just dabbed on the ends of the ridges to push the contrast that bit further. On these weapons you can see a few circles, which I imagine to be where the toxic ammunition is stored. To convey a dangerous, sickly message, I chose to paint these spheres orange. I start by base coating each globe with Jacaro orange and then apply a wash of Seraphim sepia to help darken the edges, which will help separate it from the rest of the weapon. Once the wash is dry, I apply a circle of Towelite Ochre to the centre, making sure to leave some of the previous colour visible. Then lastly I cover an even smaller area with a bone colour as a final highlight. The hoofs and claws of Hive Fleet Kraken are normally black, and I chose to keep this nice and simple as we mainly want people looking at the heads and guns rather than the feet. I base coat in the rather matte black by Vallejo, but any black will do. Then, as I had some ice yellow on my palette, I mixed that into the black to create a grey for some edge highlights. You can of course use any grey paint, I just chose to mix what I had on the palette for simplicity. Just want to interrupt this video to say a huge thank you for those of you that watched last week's video and those of you who have subscribed to the channel recently, because I just reached the 1000 subscribers mark and that is extremely exciting. So thank you very much, my end of year goal has been reached. Let's see what else we could do this year. Now we are getting to the final stages of the paint job, and we are going to start by applying pink horror to the brain and any of the exposed flesh rent things on the legs and the back chimneys. I then wash them with Carabao Crimson to bring all the ridges back into focus. Once dry, I simply highlight by using pink horror again to pick out the most raised details. The last thing to paint on these guys is the sharp teeth. To do this, I base coat them with Scrag Brown, and whilst you could use a wash to bring out the details, I chose to just pick out the ends of each tooth with a bone colour and call it a day. I know I could have pushed this further, and I probably will on something else like the Screamer Killer, but for now I just wanted to paint these simply for getting them on the tabletop. Let me know in the comments what Tyranid models I should paint next. Thank you for watching, and until next time, I shall see you later.